So what does this kind of culture look like? And what role can we as parents, as teachers, as mental health professionals, how can we play into this? And one of my pet peeves increasingly is guiding with guilt versus shame. And sometimes, unless we really tune our ears to hear shaming, we don't pick up on the fact that that's what it is. But once you really kind of tune your ears for shaming, you start to hear it all the time because it's so pervasive in how we think we should parent, how we think we should motivate kids. For example, at a swim meet, that kid was just a little bit faster than you. You couldn't keep up, and that could be subtle, but it's still a comparison of you with somebody else, and the message that you weren't good enough, or you're not studying and applying yourself as much as your sister did when she was your age. As the older sibling, I know that was always one of my biggest sensitivities of, I don't want to be the standard setter, but I know I'm mindful of that sometimes when I'm talking about my oldest child to my youngest child. I don't want her to resent him for doing well and setting high expectations. So, what does guilt look like compared to shame? And if I'm talking about something from a perspective of guilt, then I'm learning from it. And so at the end of a race or a basketball game or whatever kind of sport, a kid's participating in, or for LeBron James after the end of the NBA Finals, I'm not much of a LeBron fan, so I get to laugh about that a little bit. But any time there's some sort of loss or defeat, or things didn't turn out the way you wanted them to, then the conversation can be, okay, what did you do well? What would you do different next time? What did you learn from this? What kind of help do you need from others to make that happen? And what's your plan for how you're going to do that? And I think, honestly, one of the places that shaming happens so much, and it's state endorsed, is around testing. And it's not just shaming on kids, it's shaming on teachers. And there's this fear and coercive process that happens so often that is just awful for that kind of culture and environment that we want to create within our schools. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have that kind of formative testing of, okay, here's what you're good at, here's your strengths right now. Let's pick out some places that you're going to work toward next year, and here's a plan for you, and what would that look like? So elimination of ridicule of the child and of others in the presence of children. How many of you have ever witnessed a child being ridiculed in front of others? Isn't that the most uncomfortable feeling ever? I heard that at my daughter's school this year, and I literally think my blood pressure was off the charts as I walked into the principal's office and was like, this is not okay. But in the moment, it works as a really good control of behavior, because all the kids that are watching that are going, oh my gosh, what did they do to have that happen? And I don't want to ever have that experience. So I'm never going to do that, because that feels awful just hearing it happen to this child. So I don't ever want to be that kid. So, in the same way that buying candy for your child at the grocery store when they're throwing a fit can be really reinforcing to the parent because it makes it stop. Learning vicariously from other people being shamed around you is really, there's a lot of learning that happens. But unfortunately, it's not the kind of learning that we want, because there's an anxiety that is so present when I'm being controlled in a classroom by shame and fear and intimidation versus a sense of care and a permission to fail but try again. That's there. Active listening and intentional social construction to give children language of connection and empathy. So, how many of you have done some sort of like active listening class, responsive listening, all sorts of different ways that we frame that? One of the core skills in non-directive play therapy is this kind of reflective listening, where I'm saying out loud, okay, I see that you're picking out this, and oh, those characters are really having fun. You're really frustrated because you can't get that Play-Doh open. I'm verbalizing and acknowledging what the child's feeling and what they're doing. And there's ways that can happen within a classroom that allows kids to hear and feel a sense of validation and a sense of recognition that, yeah, I am frustrated and I'm confused. And it can be said in a way that gives them permission to ask for help. Oh, it seems like you're a little bit confused about that. Here, let me help you. And what do we need to do to help you understand this? Instead of, it seems you're a little confused about this. So even the difference in tone makes a huge difference as far as how much that child's really going to give themselves permission to ask for help. And then if I'm not given permission to ask for help and I just feel horrible about myself for the rest of the day because I don't understand this, then how likely is that going to come out on the playground when somebody else makes me feel bad about the shoes that I'm wearing? Then that's the recipe for that kind of physical aggression or even relational aggression. Well, if I feel like crap in the classroom, maybe I can at least feel better about myself on the playground because I can make all these kids play with me because I threatened to not be their friend or to string their underwear up on the flagpole. I don't think that happens as much anymore, thankfully, but happens in the movies. So language of connection and empathy is another part of how much we talk about those kinds of concepts with kids, how much we value them taking time to reflect on how something made another child in the class feel. My daughter had for her 7th birthday a few weeks ago, we had a sleepover. It was my first attempt at sleepovers with a bunch of girls. So I had 6 7-year-olds for a long time. And so one of the exercises we did at the beginning when everybody showed up was sit down and have a conversation about how do you all want to be treated by each other while you're here, and what, I'm not going to tell you what the rules are necessarily. I want you to decide what your expectations are of each other. And it was interesting to me to listen to them talk about what they didn't want to happen and be able to say that. And I think it was so much, and I can't take credit for it. I got the idea off Pinterest, which was a great resource, by the way, of finding things to keep them busy. But it was interesting, though, to hear the ideas that they came up with, and it was so much more specific than anything that I was going to ever say about what they could do and what they couldn't do toward each other. And I heard them multiple times enforcing that against each other. I remember we said we weren't going to tell secrets, because there was a couple of girls that wanted to go off and whisper, and then one of the other girls was like, wait, no, we're all here as a group. We weren't going to tell secrets, because remember, that could hurt somebody's feelings. And the self-correction process was really cool to watch. There's a couple of times I had to intervene, but I won't lie. But it was generally fairly drama-free. Reward and recognize personal acceptance of responsibility versus shaming someone's responsibility for what happened. One of the big rules in my house, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, is you get in a lot less trouble when you tell me the truth about what you did. versus if I have to find it out myself. Which is, really a reinforcement of you taking responsibility for your actions. And if you come and say, I really messed up on this, I'm sorry, and take responsibility for that, then there might not even be a situation where you get grounded necessarily, kind of depending on what you did. If you burn the house down or something, maybe there's more responsibility. But in that, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier of the discussion of a plan for next time. What did you learn from this experience? And then creating a culture where it's safe to say, I don't know, or I need help. Giving permission for people to admit their vulnerability. And by the way, this certainly is not unique to kids. And I think this kind of description really is an environment that we'd all like to be in, whether it be a workplace or a family environment or any kind of system that you could function in. Coaching conflict management, respect, empathy in sibling relationships, close friendships, and relationships with strangers, interactions with strangers. So sibling relationships are always interesting because I don't do like a lot of group work or anything like that. A lot of times the social skills piece that I do with kids is really more within their sibling unit, especially if they're close in age. And having 30 minutes where the kids are just kind of playing in my play therapy area and just listening for the inevitable situations where they're not going to agree with each other. Somebody wants to do this, somebody wants to do that, and what happens there? And being ready to step in and, okay, I hear you saying that you want to build something in the sand and you're wanting to play with the dart guns and that you can't do both. You could choose to build in the sand by yourself or you can choose to do this by yourself, but you each want to play together. So let's think about some ideas about how you could solve this and figure out what you're going to do next. And most of the time, it happens really quickly. Well, how about we just take turns? We'll do yours first, and we'll do this one next. Great. And so it's just a matter very often of having a break in the escalation to be able to step back and think about what the different options are. And so often that can be our role as an adult, whether it be as a parent, as a teacher, as a school counselor, recognizing when that escalation is starting and being able to just introduce, okay, time out, stop. Now what are you going to do to figure this out between yourselves? And I've seen some stories of schools implementing something like that where kids are taught to call time out for each other and take breaks and training like peer mediators, where if you and your friend can't figure out how to solve whatever or having issues, then you don't go to the school counselor, you go to this other group of kids that have been trained to like basically mediate your conflict, which is interesting because those peer mediators are in the hallway with them or on the playground. It's very rarely in elementary school where that's happening, but middle school, high school, where there's other kids that are often much more accessible than a teacher might be in that setting. Interactions with strangers can go in a lot of different directions, but for example, what gets said to kids when they see somebody on the side of the street and with a sign asking for money? Is there an empathetic statement? Is there a judgment statement? Is it ignored? Or is there an openness for questions from the child? All of that feeds into that sense of empathy and some sort of caring about others. Fostering a child's sense of worthiness. which all of this kind of culminates in that sense of worthiness. And again, I highly recommend the Darren Greatley book that Brene Brown wrote a couple of years ago, because there's a whole chapter in there about parenting and parenting practices that really foster a sense of worthiness in kids. And I think it's important to differentiate worthiness from this like invulnerability, spoiled kind of piece, because there's all sorts of stereotypes out there about, as millennials go into the workplace, for example, or kids go off to college. I heard a story not too long ago about, was it Dean of Stanford or Duke or one of those schools, wrote this pretty scathing op-ed kind of thing about how entitled kids were going into school these days, about thinking that they were entitled to getting A's, shouldn't have to work this hard. And I think it's important to differentiate entitlement from a sense of worthiness. Worthiness doesn't mean that I feel like I'm just owed everything. It means I feel like I'm worthy of belonging, of connection, of respect, of love, of care, connection, and I'm confident in myself and my deservingness of that I can navigate into the world and create relationships that reflect that. And often it would translate into more patience with a difficult class, and the helicopter kind of parent that this particular dean was talking about in the article. And when I was teaching, I had a couple of experiences of that too, where parents of graduate students calling and asking about their child's grades. It's like, really? But I think in a lot of ways that really does go against a sense of worthiness, because if I believe at 18, 19, 20 years old that I'm incapable of addressing these things myself, that I need my parent to do this for me, then I don't have that sense of worthiness, that I am capable of doing those things for myself.